Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be joining us from today. Welcome, and thank you for attending today's Altair Global webinar, Leaning into the Future, What Mobility Experts Need to Know. We thank you for taking the time out of your Wednesday to join us on this topic, but before we begin, we'd like to take a quick moment to address a few housekeeping items. Please be advised that your phones have been muted by our phone system and you are in listen-only mode. However, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and make sure your phones are muted as well, just for good measure. We do encourage you to submit questions to our speakers throughout the duration of this webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation, go ahead and submit those in the question and answer window on your screen. We'll do our best to respond to each question at the end of the session. This webinar is being recorded and will be available in a follow-up email after the webinar has concluded. If you have to jump off for any reason, you can catch the rest of the session in that recording. And you can also download today's handout in your GoToWebinar control menu for printing and following along. Lastly, this webinar has been submitted for continuing education credits through Worldwide ERC and HRCI. Those activity IDs will be shared at the end of the webinar. All right, let's get this started. Our first speaker on today's topic is Sarah Dehaze, Vice President of Global Consulting Services here at Altair Global. Sarah is responsible for everything consulting services related, as you can see on the screen, including global policy design and benchmarking, industry research and thought leadership, and policy and program best practices. Sarah, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm so excited to dive into this topic.
Absolutely. And I understand that today's topic actually includes virtual work, which gives you a pretty unique perspective, correct?
It does. It's certainly been, I know, everybody's life for the last few years. But it is sort of ironic because I was actually remote for the previous decade. So it's been about a dozen years that I've actually been remote. So it's been a long road. But I will say I remember the day, as probably everybody does. I started having all of the rest of the team March 13th of 2020. That was the day that everybody started to go home and do virtual work.
Right.
And it's been quite a shift.
Right. That's awesome. Well, I can't wait to hear more about it in this session. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to introduce our next speaker and get this started.
Fantastic. I'm so excited to have my colleague Jenny Harrington, who is here today. She's a director of consulting services with us here at Altair Global. So we're going to be tag teaming throughout today's discussion. And I really do appreciate your time, Jenny. I wonder, Jenny, if you might have a tip related to remote work about maybe a tip for remote teams out there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thanks so much, Sarah. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here today. So for me, I'm a people person. So the thing that I miss the most about being in an office is really that personal connection that you're able to establish through informal conversations. You know, the people that you'd run into in the hallway or in the break room. Obviously, you don't have that when you're working remotely. So I find that, you know, really regular check-ins with team members are critical. I'm very intentional about spending part of that time talking about non-work related topics to find other connections. I think that's so important to building a team, a strong team, to find those things that you have in common and other levels to connect on. And it just looks a little different, and you really need to be intentional about it when you're working on a remote team.
Yeah, very well said. Well, awesome. Let's go ahead and dive in. So, Sarah, if you don't mind bringing us to the next slide, and I know Jenny and I are going to go ahead and go off camera to save bandwidth, another learning during COVID. So we'll do that now. Excellent. All right. Well, welcome again, everybody. And boy, what a year, right? 2022 has been so far. We're all really managing through historic times. And as always, you know, global mobility is at the forefront of change. And we're all being called on really to navigate and lead. So during today's webinar, we'll be breaking down what we expect to continue to dominate this space as we emerge from what have been somewhat dark depths of this global pandemic and dig into some of the hottest trends of the day, remote and virtual work. So if your organization has been searching for a way to respond to a plethora of remote work requests, we are here for you today. You can expect to hear more on the reality of what it takes to build a virtual work program. And you won't need to hear it all from myself or from Jenny. We're thrilled to also share an interview today with Michelle Fernandes of Novo Nordisk, who's also currently processing these types of requests every day within Novo. We'll have a few poll questions, 3 in total, in fact, for all of you to help us understand about where you are on this journey. And then Jenny will tie all of this together for us and walk through this inflection point to better understand how this topic may fit into a broader view of mobility's mission going forward. So let's move on to the next slide. I recently read that COVID affected the very fundamental of life itself, how we live, work, and travel. And taking that in, it's really impossible not to have been impacted. No one has escaped its grip, and while it remains looming for us all on some level, humans are resilient and we've pivoted out of necessity. We've reimagined the role of an office space and how people collaborate and interact, and how the seeds of organizational culture are planted, how they grow, and how they germinate. While there are some extreme examples of return to office mandates out there, they're largely in the minority, and we see hybrid work here to stay. Organizations have assessed what roles can be remote, hybrid, or even office-based, and after 2 years, employees and candidates know where they thrive. So both organization and employee are adjusting as they come together. And as you can imagine, it's not always harmonious. COVID became the tipping point for an already challenging mental health landscape. A greater focus on mental health tools and resources has driven HR and rewards functions agendas. I know when I was in corporate HR, I often heard about the buy, build, borrow talent strategy. And if yours is like many out there, you're finding it challenging to do any of these right now. The talent shortage is real and persistent, and trying to move talent across borders has been forced to a bit of a crawl in some places with a massive immigration backlog out there. I appreciated this particular quote that you see on your screen from Rebecca Roy at the Conference Board. She mentions, "We've long predicted that the pandemic would bring a tsunami of mental health issues, and 19 months later, the toll on workers is unrelenting, and in some cases, continuing to worsen. Women in particular face a disproportionate amount of pressure due to the combined demands of work and home life. If business leaders hope to cultivate a second-to-none workforce, especially in this tight labor market, improving the employee experience by providing flexibility must play a key role in the business strategy." Global mobility is pressed to build even greater flexibility into policy and programs today. We'll have more on that later. Certainly, employee experience and human-centered design were well-embedded frameworks prior to COVID, and COVID has certainly tested them. They are here to stay. We find ourselves adopting the concept of what Jenny and I call sustained disruption to describe this period, and it won't be short-lived. We will not be going back to pre-COVID days completely, and we won't bounce back super fast, but that's okay. And the exhilarating part that you see at the bottom there is that really global mobility is a key player in all of these areas and will be part of the solution. So we can now move past that seat at the table that we always talked about and go ahead and just grab the microphone. Let's take a look at some definitions of remote and virtual work. You may have heard this tweet from the Airbnb CEO to his workforce. 1, you can work anywhere, you can work from home or the office, whatever works best for you. 2, you can move anywhere in the country, like San Francisco to Nashville, and your compensation won't change. You have the flexibility to live and work in 170 countries for up to 90 days a year in each location. And 4, we'll meet up regularly for team gatherings. Most employees will connect in person every quarter for about a week at a time, some more frequently. And 5, in order to pull this off, we'll operate off of a multi-year roadmap with 2 major product releases a year, which will keep us working in a highly coordinated way. In a recent CNN article, I noticed a couple of comments to share. One from McKinsey: employees really want flexibility and choice over where, when, and how to work. They don't want to be told, you need to work here on these days. They want to be able to choose. Another quote mentioned that offering backup child or elder care to employees can help with the transition. Also, smaller perks like paying for podcast subscriptions to make the commute more enjoyable, free meals in the office, in-person learning sessions, and social gatherings can help entice workers to come back. Remote work and virtual work are terms which are familiar to us now, but they can sometimes be used interchangeably. For the purposes of today's discussion, I do want to distinguish between these two terms in a few different ways. Certainly, one can lead to another. A remote work request or idea can evolve into a business-supported request. So when we use the term remote work request today, we'll speak about something that is really a personal choice. Sometimes employees have ties to another location, and that's where they want to work for a period of time. Certainly during COVID, in many cases, remote work was simply a necessity, but it is now considered an expectation and a perk for employees. When you hear work from anywhere, again, that's usually linked to remote work, and it can be shifting for an indefinite period of time or for a more defined period of time. Virtual work, on the other hand, is typically a business-driven arrangement. It is often temporary, but sometimes is indefinite in duration. The employee may not be also physically co-located with his or her manager or team. But generally, the employee will align to the benefits, Social Security, payroll, pension incentives, and taxes of that virtual work location. So as a number of CEOs and chief talent officers are chatting up the work from anywhere offering and perk, I think we all know in global mobility that the mechanics in reality can be quite different. So we have to read that fine print. So let's get a bit of a baseline and ask our first poll question if we could, and see where you all are. Sarah, over to you.
All right, oops. Let's see here. It looks like we're having some technical difficulties, everyone. Okay, it looks like we're having some technical difficulties with the first question. If you'd like to go ahead and answer in your Q&A window, our first question here is, does or will Global Mobility own remote or virtual work requests in your organization? Go ahead and just answer in the Q&A. A for yes, B for no, HR will, C for no, the line of business, or D, we do not have requests. Again, that's A for yes, B for no, HR will, C, no, the line of business, or D, we do not have requests. And that question one last time is, does or will Global Mobility own remote or virtual work requests in your organization? Okay, let's see. We are getting quite a bit of B. We have could potentially, I'm not decided. All right, one last chance to get answers here. One person said HR operations will own. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and close here. Sarah and Jenny, looks like the majority said B for this one.
No, interesting. Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Sarah. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. And so back to that fine print that I just mentioned. How do we actually build a virtual work program from thin air? I'd suggest that you actually have some of this built, and with some additional touches, you're going to get there. You may feel that this does not sit within global mobility, somewhat similar to the poll question there, and that's totally understandable. My guess, though, is that eventually it will wind its way through and find global mobility as its home at some stage. Let's maybe break this down into a few different phases. For this process, you'll first need to define virtual work in your organization. What's the overall workforce strategy, and how does virtual work fit in here? How does it strengthen that particular strategy as well? Your definition may look very different than some of those that I had on the previous slide, and that's okay. What is your organization's risk stance? Virtual work can set off a number of alarm bells, and building this type of a program will require cross-functional collaboration and engagement, both upfront and on an ongoing basis. Partnerships are key, and more on those in a moment. Policy. Yep, another policy. I get it. No one's relocating in the traditional sense. But through those partnerships that I mentioned, you'll collect quite a bit of principles and guardrails that can be, really the framework for a virtual work policy. Business travel tools are also possibly applicable here in terms of presence tracking and monitoring. And by building this virtual work framework, organizations can shift from a bit more of a defensive to the offensive and lean into the future of virtual work. So let's look a bit at those risks and partnerships, those alarm bells that I mentioned. It's a long list, I get it, right? It's a long list of risks that lurk out there related to remote and virtual work. They're largely in the tax, immigration, legal, and cybersecurity space. You don't need to necessarily understand the nuances of all of these in depth. Those are what the partnerships are for. They will be the source of a lot of that expertise. From corporate tax to security, the travel group, legal, InfoSec, there are a lot of vulnerabilities. They're far-reaching. But I would submit that in order to, fully stand up this type of a program, you'll also want to leverage your external partnerships as well. Again, somewhat similar to business travel. There are compliance tools out there, technology solutions, and certainly for the administration of this population too. As an example, you have on the screen technology noted both in internal and external partnerships. Your internal technology team can certainly support collaboration tools for virtual workers and basic virtual office setup. The typical HRIS platforms today are unable to manage the hybrid and virtual work arrangements successfully. So global mobility leaders are often compelled to engage external supplemental technology solutions. So Sarah, let's be daring and see if we might try a second poll. Hopefully it'll work for us this time, but if not, we'll pivot and do what we need to do.
We are golden. All right, everyone, your next question here is your organization considering or has already built a virtual work policy? And your options there are yes, already built, no, but considering, or no, not a priority. So if you could take a moment and go ahead and fill that out. Looks like we already have a huge lead, Sarah and Jenny, on yes, already built.
Oh, great. Oh, fascinating. Well, that's great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Absolutely.
Well, that's great to hear that folks already have them built in some cases, so that's fantastic. Maybe you'll get a few little golden nuggets here, and we'd love to talk to you about what you've learned through that process. Today, we're actually really lucky to have a great example to share with you all today of a virtual work program, and that is Novo Nordisk. So let's prepare for that interview with Michelle. Novo built a virtual work policy in late 2021 into early 2022. They apply it to both existing employees and new hires. They noted that remote work scenarios are actually excluded from the policy. So again, personally driven decisions are excluded. These are only business-driven arrangements. A virtual work arrangement can only take place where Novo has a legal entity and certainly in just non-sanctioned countries. Work was done internally to define and secure intercompany service invoicing, and corporate tax was a major architect of a lot of the different policy elements. The policy includes defined eligibility criteria, approval chains, and details about what activities employees may not engage in during virtual work in order to drive compliance and certainly to reduce the risk exposure. Michelle and her team manage assessments in-house for requests below the SVP level. They also are involved in SVP and above, but there are further external resources leveraged in those cases. They have regular contacts with the HR community to help them understand the program and to stay up to date. So perhaps just, Sarah, while you're getting ready to put up the interview, I'll just mention a brief a bit about Michelle Fernandez's bio. So Michelle has over 20 years experience working in human resources, 10 within general HR and 10 within total rewards. And now she has moved into mobility, which I think is fascinating. 17 years or more of those 20 there have been with Novo Nordisk. So during this period, she's worked in a few different industries, business process outsourcing, engineering, and then in certainly Novo, which is in the pharma space. She noted that she has seen the company evolve from having traditional expat assignments to introducing short-term assignments and graduates, and most recently, certainly the virtual work. She's just doing it in a bit different role this time. She's seen the shift from business-driven assignments to employee-driven and now talent-driven. Michelle is based in Dubai, and so that's why we decided to go ahead and record this interview, so she was not up super late at night her time. But she has worked throughout the Middle East, Africa, Southeast Europe, India, China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. So she certainly has a global view. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Sarah, to roll tape, as we say.
So, Michelle, let's go ahead and dive into some of the questions specific to the virtual work program at Novo Nordisk. So, would you first be able to define what a virtual work arrangement is at Novo Nordisk?
Yeah. So at Novo Nordisk, how do we explain virtual work arrangement is that an employee is living in a location which is other than the location that they're working for. So for example, if I have an employee that is based out of Croatia working for the Hungary organization, then that is a virtual work option setup.
Perfect. And in terms of the actual administration of the program at Novo Nordisk, that has gone to global mobility. And so do you feel like that makes the most sense? It's a natural choice for global mobility to run the program itself at Novo?
This is actually a debatable area, I would say. So what we have is they want someone to run the governance and then to connect the dots. Okay. So from a mobility perspective, what we can do from our side is we put a framework together, we put a governance model, we provide guidance, we define roles and responsibilities. However, besides that, it's the actual role of the manager to implement the setup as such.
So Novo also decided to have new hires and existing employees in the program, I believe. Do you see then that this program is used as a talent attraction tool?
Yeah. So what they're actually doing when they implement this for externals is one is we are looking at catering to those roles where it's hard to find hot skills. We are looking at roles wherein people are not really mobile but are needed for the company. So it's very selective of how we are using it. So if you ask me personally, it's more we're catering more for a business need rather than the employee's personal preference.
So with respect to the communication plan that was done internally within Novo, could you explain a little bit of how that has gone and continues to happen?
If you ask me, we have done a couple of activities to run the communication across the organization, but I personally believe that we need to do more. And why do I say this is one is making employees and manager aware of what is virtual work arrangements and how do you implement it? What are the criterias in place? So to give you an example, like today, if I'm an employee, I just take my laptop and say, I want to work from the Bahamas. And then after 3 months, I want to work from Spain. After 3 months, I want to work from France. This sounds a lot this sounds a lot interesting, but in reality this is not really possible because there is certain governance, certain rules that we have defined in order to be legally working in a country wherein we are declaring taxes, where we are contributing to social security, we're making sure employees have got their health insurance plans and everything that is needed to be in a compliant setup.
In the crafting of the Novo policy and program, those were done by a couple of different groups almost within global mobility. So on one side, the policy was developed and then it was handed off to yourself, I think, to build and execute the administration of that. How did that work for you all in Novo?
I thought it was a fantastic start. So in terms of we've had qualified and experienced people and having a network to look into the process of putting a policy together. So one thing is bringing the external expertise in-house in terms of what is needed. Second is then making use or collaborating with our finance colleagues in terms of how compliant it is and um, how possible it is to implement such kind of setup. So
Right.
there was a combination of different functions involved in looking at what is it that we could put in place when it comes to the governance and how we are structured as an organization in terms of financially as well. And one of the key things was the permanent establishment risk that we were looking at. So how is it that our entities are set up legally that has got impact on on implementation of these policies.
And I understand you have a couple of consultants on your team, and you're handling the assessments in-house. And might you share a little bit about why you decided to do those assessments in-house and what kind of team members you needed to have on the team in order to be able to deliver those in terms of their expertise?
When it comes to the assessment part, the reason we prefer someone internally is to understand our organization and to be able to provide guidance as such. So, to give you a few examples, one of the things that we focus on in terms of putting an arrangement in place is we need to make sure that there is a legal entity in place, and you need to understand the organization to factor in where is it that it is possible, where it is not possible. Then second thing being is there are various changing environment or external circumstances, like for example with what's happening in Russia and the sanctions, and then understanding how we are operating as an organization. How can we implement the setup based on these defined guardrails that we have got in place, where we need to have SLAs in place, we need to have intercompany invoices. So are these things actually possible from a Novo Nordisk context? So you need to be having that level of awareness to to provide that guidance and the expertise to our managers as
Yeah,
such, and that
excellent.
really helps.
And then I believe you mentioned that SVP level and above requires a little bit different assessment. What happens there? Could you tell me about that?
The reason we are looking at SPP -1 and above, it's mainly for the permanent establishment risk. Specifically, if we have senior management in commercial roles, and here we are specifically looking at collaboration with our internal corporate tax team to see whether this specific role is going to create any kind of permanent establishment risk.
Okay.
And we make sure that we are working within the finance framework that we have in place.
I can imagine that when you first took on the program, you probably needed to create some templates, for your operations to happen. How did that happen? And, what kinds of templates do you have?
There's a couple of things. One is more from the data capturing so that we can produce statistics. So this is one of the elements that we focused on. Then the second element is it's more for for making sure that we have a standardized process as such. So in terms of what is it that is needed if we have to have an employee that is traveling frequently between two locations and is on a virtual setup. So there we give a common guidance, and then we have specific templates in place to ensure that we have communicated to the employee what would that actually mean for them. So if they are traveling between two locations, the company is committing to having a tax neutral salary. So whatever you're earning in terms of uh, if you were not traveling that much, this is something that Novo Nordisk is committing to.
Is it like a letter of understanding in a way that they sign, or does anybody sign
Yeah.
it? Like, okay. I know we spoke about the use of technology to support the program and that might be something that, you would like to look into in the future. What would be helpful there? What would it help to facilitate for you? What functionality do you feel like you need?
One of the biggest challenges that we have right now is the systems that we have in place is not really supporting the processes uh, when it comes to the virtual work option setup. So for example, if we have to get the manager to create a position, if we want to hire the person into that position, okay, so there is a lot of local knowledge that is needed, or the way the systems are structured wherein it's catering only if your manager is in the same location as you. So these are some of the changes that is needed, or the company needs to invest in to have a more sustainable solution where we are minimizing the manual work involved in the process.
Because the general HRIS system is not compatible for this type of a program. Well, we have a lot of folks that I think will be watching this particular webinar, and I'm sure there's some practical advice that you might have to help them if they're considering to build and implement this type of a program. Is there anything you might share with them in terms of advice or any wisdom?
From my perspective, I think the assessment is the most important one to make sure it's a compliant setup. Besides that, there are these small little things when it comes to the onboarding of the employee that is extremely important for the new employee to have a good experience. And it is very important that we share this with managers. Like a manager is programmed in such a way that he's used to, or she is used to, the process that they follow in their own country, but not necessarily it's the same in other countries. So it's always nice to know what is it that you're getting yourself into before you commence on this journey of virtual work options, and making sure that the manager and the employee have got a good experience.
That's great advice. Thank you so much. And thank you, Michelle, for just sharing so much information about your program. It's really fascinating.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Sarah.
Thank
It
you.
was a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for that great interview. I want to also extend a huge thank you to Michelle Fernandes with Novo Nordisk for her insight on the development of their virtual work program. It provides such great context to hear how they were able to stand up this program and what needs to be considered as we think about the future of mobility programs and how or if virtual work fits. Here we've captured some of the key takeaways from the conversation with Michelle. I heard that at Novo Nordisk, virtual work is not just an employee accommodation program, but really does fill a business need by broadening the pool of candidates for those hard to fill roles where perhaps an employee isn't mobile. I think this is important to keep in mind, particularly if you're part of an organization who isn't considering developing or implementing a virtual work program and some of the advantages that might come with it. As we've heard from other organizations and is confirmed by Michelle, clearly the question of whether these types of programs should fit with mobility is still an open one, which I think we heard reflected in the poll results earlier. Identifying your internal and external experts is important as you consider which stakeholders to engage in crafting the framework for a remote work program, as well as administering the assessment of virtual work viability. It's also clear that communication and education for both employees and managers play such a critical role in the foundation of a remote, virtual, or work from anywhere program. Working remotely seems like such a simple concept, and oftentimes employees don't necessarily understand the compliance implications of sitting in a country other than that of their manager or the work entity. Risk tolerance has also been a key theme today. So understanding your organization's risk tolerance will help inform the guardrails around which the framework and governance are developed. Michelle also spoke a bit about technology as an enabler. It will be very interesting to see how the technology landscape evolves to meet the needs of these remote and virtual work programs. It's clear that a lack of technology to support the program is a challenge. To Michelle's point, companies with virtual work programs will need to consider investing in a system that can support the complexity of tracking employees who are working virtually in order to ensure that the program will be sustainable. And with that, that will take us to our third poll, and I will hand it back to Sarah Lottie.
All right. So your next poll on the screen is, what is your biggest challenge related to work from anywhere and or virtual work? Immigration or tax compliance, legal risks, lack of infrastructure, employee expectations, or company culture? So let's give everyone a few moments to answer here. And I am seeing a pretty even keeled trend between immigration, tax compliance, and company culture so far. Let's take a look.
Interesting. I don't think there's any huge surprises there, but I'm fascinated to see company culture as one of the biggest challenges we're up against. So as we think about virtual work, remote work, and work from anywhere programs, what we're really talking about are programs and policies that provide flexibility. Flexibility truly is the hallmark of mobility, which gives it sustainability. And as we know, sustainable mobility programs are a critical enabler of delivering business and talent strategies. Having flexible programs and policies will support business continuity in a volatile and dynamic environment, such as we've seen over the last couple of years and expect to continue into the foreseeable future. There are many ways to think about what a flexible program should look like. As we've heard discussed today, remote and virtual work are both great examples of flexible programs. Offering commuter assignments or core flex policies can also bring a level of flexibility to your program. From a policy perspective, introducing flexibility may inform what types of benefits are offered and may provide some level of choice for the business or the employee by acknowledging the unique circumstances involved with each case. The need for flexibility may come from business cost constraints or due to an employee's personal situation. Accommodating both business requested and employee initiated moves while providing appropriate levels of support is another example of bringing flexibility to your program. From the employee's perspective, flexibility could mean unique types of work arrangements, whether it be working in a different location from their manager or team, or offering new development opportunities that may be available through non-traditional types of assignments. As an example, participation on a remote project that doesn't require a physical move may open doors for an assignee whose personal situation would have precluded them from participating in the past. Removing barriers to mobility and avoiding process rigidities that can delay or prevent assignments can provide personalization to meet the needs of new and diverse assignee groups. As you think about bringing more flexibility to your program, make sure you do it intentionally. Know what problems you're trying to solve and ensure that your policies align with broader business and talent strategies, are consistent with other programs across your organization, and a reflection of your company culture and values. While there are many rewards to offering flexibility to both the business as well as the employee, it will be incumbent upon you to educate your business partners around the implications of the flexible options you offer, as well as your duty of care. Next slide. So this quote you see here from Mary Alice Vusick, the Chief People Officer at Thomson Reuters, really resonated with me in terms of the need for organizational agility in the war for talent. Everything she's talking about here, from flexibility to prioritizing mental health and well-being, delivering growth opportunities, embracing DE&I, and the value employees have put on purpose-driven work. Organizational agility is required to meet each of those. In today's environment, organizations need to build that agility in order to maintain relevance. Building a flexible mobility program can play a significant role in doing so. Through flexibility, you ensure that your organizational infrastructure can support business and talent needs in a dynamic environment. By designing ways of operating that focus on building adaptability versus reactivity, your policies can maintain relevance without needing revisions based on unexpected or volatile external factors. This is how you create a sustainable program that can take you into the future. The new world of work is more nuanced and personalized, and increasingly, employees see flexibility as an organizational value that they expect. They are seeking employers who build cultures and practices that are values-driven and adaptive by design. Employees want to be heard and seen, and to know that regardless of their personal circumstances or external factors at play, their company can and will support them. We hope that you walk away today with some helpful insight through the behind-the-scenes peek at the development of the Novo Nordisk program, as well as some practical guidance about what to consider if you are thinking about introducing more flexibility to your organization, whether it be through a virtual work program or by some other means. Next slide. We've included here a list of references used in the development of today's webinar. If you'd like to research further as you consider the future of mobility within your organization and how you can bring flexibility and sustainability to your program. At this point, we've got a few moments left, I think, to answer some questions. So again, I will hand it back to Sarah Lottie.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jenny. Jenny's correct. We're going to give our audience a few minutes to submit any questions that might have come up in today's session through that Q&A box on the menu bar. And Sarah, I think you wanted to get some other feedback from our audience.
Sure. I think one of the things we were thinking about is, based on one of the polls earlier, a lot of you out there actually already have virtual work policies in place. So I thought it might be fun if you want to just type into the chat anything that has been kind of a lesson learned for you, or something that you might impart to others who might be joining today that could be of help as they are embarking on this type of a journey.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to see that. We do have a couple questions that have come in. So while people are giving that feedback, we'll go ahead and start with those. First one here is, how can organizations ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion considerations are part of a work from anywhere strategy? Who wants to take that, Jenny?
I'm happy to take, sure, yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So work from anywhere is inherently inclusive. It allows your employees to sit anywhere. And while there are guardrails needed from a compliance perspective, there is definitely less unconscious bias and more inclusivity in terms of who may be considered for a role or a project. This is also a great opportunity to engage internal stakeholders in developing the framework. You could include your DE&I team and leaders in the conversation where they might have a unique perspective to offer.
Great. Okay. And another one here says, are there cases when work from anywhere should not be an option?
Why don't I take that one then, Sarah? Yeah, I think absolutely. Work from anywhere is not necessarily the right solution for every industry, every type of organization. I think, it makes sense also to just, again, question, does it really strengthen your workforce strategy? Does it align with your corporate values? All of those different questions posed earlier. Work from anywhere program inherently brings a lot of risk, right? An entire half slide of risk. So that may not be appealing for a lot of organizations. There's also significant administration involved, and that may not align with where you are and where your organization is and where the organization may wish to invest. A lot of requests that may not always end in, an actual work, virtual work arrangement. So there's a lot of work up front in order to build that. So definitely, yeah, I agree. There are lots of reasons it may not be for you.
We have another one here. Who do you think should perform the virtual work assessment? What should be included in that assessment?
Another good question. I think, we heard from Michelle about how critical that assessment is. And it really goes back to, where the risk that you've identified sits. So it's so critically important to have a subject matter expert who really understands the compliance risks that can conduct an assessment. It really can't be done by a generalist. It needs to be done by a specialist. Whether you have, internal expertise or use an external partner, it's really just going to depend on the structure of your organization in terms of what makes sense in conducting those assessments.
Jenny, I remember when I was at Publicis, and you know, we had a really lengthy assessment form. I mean, it was daunting, but to your point, it required not only some internal subject matter experts, but we absolutely leveraged a lot of external subject matter experts, and it lengthens the time in terms of turnaround to do those types of assessment, and requires that level of specialist that I do think is really critical to bear in mind when you're crafting this. You know, you can really go deep in some of these areas, and that's a lot of subject matter expertise to expect, I think, from an internal team each time.
I agree.
Sarah, any other questions?
Okay. Yeah, we've got a couple more here. And just a reminder, folks, to go ahead if you have any other questions. We've got a few more minutes here. There's two questions here that seem to be about the same topic, so I'm going to give them both to you. The first is, our Chief People Officer is interested in formalizing WFA as an employee perk. What should the next steps be? And then the last one is, what day threshold are most companies applying to work from anywhere?
Right. Maybe I'll take that one. So I think engagement of some of those internal partnerships and external partners also really critical to start with. But I also think you need to develop some form of a working definition of what virtual work is or isn't. What's in scope, what's out of scope? What kind of risk tolerance does the organization have? In terms of that threshold question, that's often part of this sort of working definition discussion, I think. A lot of companies are out there doing a lot of different things. Like you heard with Airbnb, they were saying 90 days, which made me gasp. I don't know about anybody else, but that seemed really long. I've more typically seen something along the lines of 30 days from a risk perspective. So, I mean, even 30 can pile on, you know, some challenges, but generally I think companies are willing to take the risk of sort of, you know, anywhere up to that amount. Jenny, I don't know, anything else that you would perhaps think in this regard too?
Yeah, I was just going to add, you know, I just would like to reinforce the more work you can do on the front end to gain alignment on that framework across the functional areas within your organization, definitely the more successful your program will be. And I would agree with your assessments on kind of the 30-day threshold being what we're seeing applied most frequently.
Okay, great. Well, unless we have any last minute questioners here, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. But before I do the wrap up and discuss the credit activity IDs for this session, Sarah or Jenny, do you have any parting thoughts for our audience?
Well, you know, I might just mention, since we're on the topic, we do have an upcoming survey that Altair's Global Consulting Services will be launching, and I think it's probably going to time with maybe early September. We're right now in the throes of a big vote going on to see what the winning topic will be. Work from anywhere is one of the topics, but there are others to choose from. So really looking forward to diving into some of those super hot topics very shortly with everybody.
Awesome. Yes, please check your emails for that survey to see which one will lead. Thank you for that, Sarah. Well, I want to thank you both, Sarah and Jenny, for your time here today and for all of this wisdom. Thank you as well to Michelle, even though she's not on. Appreciated that interview. And for everyone who came on the line today, thank you. We know your time is valuable and we appreciate your attendance in today's session. Any questions that have not been answered or that came in last minute, we'll be sure to get to in a follow-up email at a later date. And lastly, from all of us at Altair Global, we want to thank you for attending once again and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Sarah and Jenny.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.